Rain slammed against the broken sidewalk as Alara Miles hurried through the narrow service alley behind the closed factories, her breath fogging in the cold night air. The late shift at the roadside cafe had dragged on again, and every minute past midnight meant another dollar she didn't have for the babysitter. Alara clutched her jacket tighter, the thin fabric doing little against the biting October wind. She hated this shortcut, hated the way the shadows swallowed sound, but it cut nearly 20 minutes off her walk home. Nothing good happens in places like this. Her late mother's voice echoed in her mind. Welcome to Nne'folktales, where we share with you and heartfelt stories that will reshape our mindset. Please like and subscribe to my channel for more contents like this. Alara gave a tired, bitter smile. Nothing good had happened in bright places either. Not the cafe, where customers snapped their fingers at her. Not the landlord's office, where rent notices piled up. Not the hospital where her husband had died 3 years earlier, leaving her alone with a 5-year-old daughter and a life held together by tips and stubborn hope. Her sneakers splashed through puddles as she picked up her pace. That was when she heard it. Not the rain. Not traffic. A sound sharp and wrong. A sob. No, 2 sobs. Hi, thin, terrified. Children. Alara stopped, so suddenly her heart felt like it slammed into her ribs. Keep walking, her mind screamed. Go home. Think of Mara waiting for you. But the sound rose again, shaky and desperate, and it sounded exactly like the cry her daughter made when nightmares trapped her in the dark. Alara swallowed hard, turned toward the sound, and whispered, Please don't let this be what I think it is, even as her feet carried her forward. She clicked on her phone flashlight and stepped into the narrow space between 2 abandoned buildings, the beam cutting through rain and shadow. What she saw made her stomach drop. A man lay slumped against the brick wall, his suit soaked through, dark with rain and blood. His breathing was shallow, uneven. His arm was wrapped tightly around 2 small children, twins no older than 4, with wet curls plastered to their foreheads and eyes wide with terror. One of them whimpered again, clutching the man's shirt like it was the only thing keeping him alive. Oh no, Alara whispered, dropping to her knees without thinking. She hovered her hands, unsure where to touch, afraid she'd hurt them more. Hey, I'm not here to hurt you. I promise. The man stirred slightly, a broken sound rattling in his chest. Blood seeped from his shoulder, fresh and bright under the flashlight. Alara reached for her phone to dial emergency services, but the little boy grabbed her wrist with shocking strength. No, he croaked, voice raw from crying. Bad men come back. Alara froze. Bad men, she repeated softly. The man's eyes fluttered open, gray and unfocused. He tried to speak and failed. His grip tightened around the children, even as his strength clearly drained away. Listen to me, Alara said, her voice steady despite the fear pounding through her. You're bleeding badly. I can help, but we can't stay here. The man shook his head weakly. No hospital, he rasped. They'll find us. Alara stared at him, rain dripping down her face. If you stay here, you'll die, she said bluntly. The man looked at her then, really looked at her, and something shifted in his eyes. Fear, calculation, desperation. Please, he whispered. My kids. The girl buried her face against the man's chest and cried harder. The boy's lips trembled as he whispered, Daddy, don't sleep. Alara's chest tightened painfully. These weren't strangers anymore. These were children clinging to the only safety they knew. Okay, Alara said, her voice low but firm. Okay, I don't know who you are and I don't know what you're running from, but we can't leave you here. She slid her arm under the man's shoulder and tried to lift him. He groaned, barely conscious, but with her help he staggered upright. He was tall and heavy, solid beneath the ruined suit, and she felt warm blood soak through her sleeve. My apartment's close, she said through gritted teeth. Not safe. Not pretty, but it's dry. The man nodded once. Enough. They moved through the rain like ghosts, Elara half dragging him, the twins clinging silently to his legs. Every passing car made her flinch. Every shadow looked like a threat. By the time they reached her building, a worn, 3-story walk-up that smelled like old paint and damp stairs, the man collapsed twice. Elara slapped his face, both times, panic sharpening her movements. "Stay with me," she snapped. "You don't get to check out now." When she finally shoved her apartment door open, Mrs. Henley, her elderly neighbor and babysitter, gasped. "Lord above, Elara, what happened?" "Please," Elara said quickly, "take Mara home with you tonight. I'll explain later. I'll pay extra." Mrs. Henley looked at the bleeding man, the silent children, then at Elara's shaking hands. She nodded. "You always had a soft heart, girl," she said quietly. "Be careful with it." Once alone, Elara laid the man carefully on her couch, wincing as blood soaked into the worn cushions. The twins stood frozen in the middle of the room, dripping rainwater, staring at her like she might disappear if they blinked. "You're safe here," Elara said gently. "I need to fix your daddy, okay?" She grabbed her old first aid kit, hands trembling as she cut away the fabric around the wound. The bullet had gone clean through the shoulder. Painful, dangerous, but survivable if infection didn't set in. "What's your name?" she asked softly as she cleaned the wound. The boy hesitated. "Theo," he whispered. "And my sister is Lila." Elara smiled faintly. "Those are good names. I'm Elara." The man groaned as she worked, teeth clenched, sweat mixing with rain on his skin. "You're doing good," she murmured. "Don't be dramatic." That earned a weak, breathless laugh. When she finally bandaged him, exhaustion slammed into her. The twins curled up against their father, finally sleeping. Elara covered them with her only good blanket. As she cleaned the floor, something caught her eye. A wallet, expensive leather. She picked it up, meaning only to look for medical information. But the name on the ID made her knees buckle. Julian Crown. She knew that name. Everyone did. Media mogul. Real estate empire. One of the richest men in the state. Elara stared at the unconscious man on her couch. "You've got to be kidding me," she whispered. Julian woke hours later, his voice hoarse. "You didn't call the police." Elara crossed her arms. "Your kid told me not to. Said bad men would come." He closed his eyes briefly. "They would have." She didn't sugarcoat it. "You nearly died in an alley holding your children. Someone tried to kill you. I deserve the truth." He looked at his sleeping twins, then back at her. "My former partner wants me dead," he said quietly. "I found out he was using my company to move illegal money. I was going to expose him." Elara laughed once, sharp and humorless. "So I accidentally adopted a billionaire fugitive with trauma and twins." Julian managed a weak smile. "I only need a few days," he said. "Then I can fix this." Elara thought of her daughter asleep down the hall, of overdue bills, of how close she'd come to walking away. "3 days," she said finally. "That's it. You keep quiet. You don't draw attention. And if trouble comes here," she leaned closer, "you make sure my daughter is safe." Julian met her gaze. "On my life," he said solemnly. Elara exhaled slowly, the weight of her choice settling in. 3 days. Just 3 days. She had no idea yet that those days would tear her world apart and rebuild it into something she never imagined possible. Morning arrived quietly, announced not by sunlight but by Mara's soft footsteps padding down the hallway. Elara was awake instantly, heart racing, every sound from the living room sharp in her ears. She slipped out of bed and intercepted her daughter before she could burst through the door. "Hey, sunshine," Elara whispered, forcing a smile. "We have guests." Mara's eyes widened. "Guests?" Elara nodded. "A man and his kids. They need help for a few days." Mara thought hard, then nodded with the seriousness only children could manage. Okay, I'll be quiet. In the living room, Julian Crown was awake, sitting upright with obvious effort, his arm cradling Theo and Lila, who blinked sleepily at the unfamiliar room. "Good morning," Julian said gently. "You must be Mara." She stared at the twins. "You look the same," she said in awe. Lila giggled. Something in Alara's chest loosened at that sound. For a few minutes, the apartment felt almost normal. 3 children on the floor with crayons, a wounded man sipping water, and Alara making toast from the last of her bread. Then Julian spoke quietly. "They'll keep looking," he said. "I can't stay invisible forever." Alara leaned against the counter. "Then we stop running." Julian frowned. "How?" She met his eyes. "We expose him. Not later. Now." When he hesitated, she added, "You said yourself, if you disappear, he wins." Julian exhaled slowly. "I have evidence," he admitted, "but it's hidden in my office, and going back there would get me killed." Alara nodded once. "Then I'll go." Julian tried to argue. He failed. Alara had the kind of stubborn resolve built from years of survival. "You're injured," she said flatly. "You're famous. I'm invisible." He stared at her like she'd just spoken another language. "That shouldn't be an advantage," he said quietly. "But it is," she replied. "People like you are watched. People like me are ignored." With help from an old contact Julian trusted, a facilities manager who still believed in him, Alara entered the glass tower downtown 2 days later wearing borrowed clothes and a borrowed name. Her heart pounded as she cleaned desks that cost more than her car once had. When she reached Julian's office, her hand shook, but she found the hidden drive exactly where he said it would be. She nearly screamed when footsteps stopped outside the door. A voice spoke, calm, confident, dangerous. "Search everything," it said. Alara hid, breath shallow, praying silently. The footsteps moved on. She didn't stop shaking until she was blocks away, the drive heavy in her pocket. When she burst back into her apartment, Julian stood despite the pain. "You got it," he breathed. Alara nodded. "Now you finish this." That night, with help from people still loyal to him, Julian handed everything over to federal authorities. Arrests followed quickly. By morning, news alerts buzzed across phones everywhere. The empire built on lies was collapsing. Protection came fast. Officers, safe locations, paperwork. For the first time since the alley, Alara could breathe. Julian sat on her couch, his twins asleep beside him, his face pale but peaceful. "It's over," he said softly. Alara nodded, though her chest felt oddly tight. She knew what came next. Julian would return to his world. She would return to hers. "You saved us," he said quietly. "All of us." Alara shook her head. "I just didn't walk away." Julian watched her for a long moment. "That's rarer than you think." A week later, after statements and security briefings, Julian stood in her kitchen, healed enough to leave. "I won't forget this," he said. "I won't forget you." Alara managed a small smile. "Take care of your kids." Theo ran up and hugged her leg. "Thank you for saving Daddy," he said seriously. Lila nodded. Alara blinked back tears. "You take care of him, too." When the door closed behind them, the apartment felt too quiet. Alara sank onto the couch, unsure whether she felt relief or loss. 2 months passed. Life settled but changed. Then a letter arrived. Thick paper. Official seal. Alara opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a scholarship fund for Mara. Full coverage. Another document followed. A job offer. Training included. Flexible hours. No charity, the note read. An opportunity. If you want it. Alara sat at the table for a long time, staring. That evening, she called the number. "I don't know if I belong in your world," she said honestly. Julian's voice was warm. "You already proved you do." 6 months later, Alara stood in a bright office, no apron, no fear knotting her stomach. Julian greeted her with a smile. "Ready." "Terrified," she admitted. "Good," he said. "Means you care." In the lobby, she caught her reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back. That weekend, Mara ran through a garden laughing with Theo and Lila, the sound light and free. Elara watched from the porch as Julian joined her, hands in his pockets. "Funny," he said. "All my money, all my power, and the thing that saved me was a woman who refused to walk past crying children." Elara smiled softly. "Funny how life works." He glanced at her. "Stay," he said, not as an order, not as a billionaire, but as a man who had learned humility the hard way. Elara looked at her daughter, at the twins, at the future that no longer felt so small. "One day at a time," she said. Julian nodded. Together, they watched the children play, knowing that everything had changed because one woman chose courage over fear in a dark alley on a rainy night. Life did not transform overnight, and Elara discovered that was the hardest lesson of all. The job came with training sessions, late nights, and moments when she felt painfully out of place among polished voices and confident smiles. Some days she returned home exhausted, second-guessing every decision she had made since the rainy alley. But Mara noticed the change before Elara did. "You smile more now," her daughter said one evening while they washed dishes together. Elara paused, surprised. "Do I?" Mara nodded. "You don't look scared all the time." The words landed deeper than Elara expected. At work, Julian never treated her like a charity case. He corrected her when she made mistakes, trusted her with responsibility, and listened when she spoke. "You have good instincts," he told her one afternoon after she flagged an issue others missed. "You see people, not just numbers." Elara shrugged, uncomfortable with praise. "That's because numbers never needed help," she said. Late evenings turned into long conversations about parenting, grief, and rebuilding after loss. Julian admitted quietly, "I spent years thinking success would protect my children. I was wrong." Elara answered just as softly, "I thought being careful would keep us safe. I was wrong too." Somewhere between shared coffee and shared silences, respect grew into something warmer, steadier, and unspoken. The day Julian's trial testimony concluded, Elara sat in the courtroom behind him, hands folded tightly in her lap. When the verdict was read, final and decisive, she felt a strange calm settle over her. It was done. Outside, reporters shouted questions Julian ignored. He turned instead to Elara. "It's finally over," he said, like he was testing the words. She nodded. "Now you get to live." That evening, the children celebrated with pizza on the living room floor, laughing loudly, safely. Julian watched them, eyes shining. "I almost lost them," he said, quietly later. "And I almost lost myself." Elara looked at him steadily. "You didn't," she said, "because you chose to do the right thing." He met her gaze. "And because you didn't walk away." He hesitated, then added, "I don't want to build my future without you in it." Elara felt fear stir, old and familiar, but it didn't rule her anymore. "I'm not asking for guarantees," she said honestly. "Just honesty." Julian smiled. "That I can promise." It wasn't dramatic. There were no grand declarations. Just two people choosing to move forward together, aware of the risks, but no longer ruled by them. A year later, Elara stood in the same city where her life had once felt so small, watching Mara race Theo and Lila across a sunlit park. The past no longer haunted her steps. It informed them. Julian joined her, quieter than he used to be, steadier. "Funny thing," he said. "Losing everything taught me what actually mattered." Elara smiled. "Funny thing," she replied. "Having almost nothing taught me I still had something worth protecting." They watched the children tumble into laughter, unafraid, unburdened. Elara thought back to the rain, the blood, the fear, and the choice she had made without knowing where it would lead. She had not become someone else. She had simply become more herself, braver, steadier, unwilling to look away. Julian reached for her hand, and this time she didn't hesitate. Together, they stood not as a billionaire and a waitress, not as savior and saved, but as two people who had learned that courage wasn't loud and love wasn't bought. It was chosen again and again, especially when the world went dark. Years later, when Alara sometimes walked past the cafe where she once counted coins at the end of every shift, she no longer felt bitterness or regret. She felt gratitude. Gratitude for the night she had been tired, broke, and afraid, and still chose to stop. Gratitude for the lesson she would one day explain to Mara when her daughter was old enough to understand. "You don't need power to change a life," she would say. "You only need the courage to care when it's inconvenient." Julian never forgot it either. No matter how high his company rose again, no matter how many meetings filled his calendar, he never forgot the woman who saw him not as a name, not as a fortune, but as a wounded father in an alley holding his children. Together, they built a quieter kind of life, one rooted in honesty, shared responsibility, and the understanding that love was not about rescue, but about standing side by side when things fell apart. And when the rain came, as it always did eventually, Alara no longer hurried through the darkness, afraid of what waited there. She knew who she was. She knew what she would choose. And she knew without doubt that the night she stopped walking had not ruined her life. It had finally begun it. Like and subscribe to my channel for more contents like this, and let us know where you are watching from under the comment section.